Today on TandTeaching.
I often say, because it's true, that we are the UK's leading free education resource, and we kind of have this promise to young people and children who use us, which is, we've got you. So if you have a need, if there's something that you're trying to learn in your curriculum learning, then we've probably got something for you. That's a very, very simple way of describing it. This time last year, we launched a set of new podcasts, which we made in partnership with BBC Sounds. So I don't know if you've heard of BBC Sounds. It's the BBC, the BBC's audio app. Amazing, radio and podcast makers. So we realised that students, that young people increasingly are listening to podcasts, and that audio was a mode of learning that we didn't really have. So we have loads of video that we're really known for, games for learning through play, but we didn't have podcasts. And so we launched last year with English literature and biology. And this year we've followed up. We've now got more English literature, we've got chemistry, and we've got physics. And they've done really, really well. And we do know, because obviously when you run websites and digital services, you have data. We do know that our website is used during the school day. So at primary, we absolutely know and expect that teachers are using our stuff on whiteboards. Less so at secondary, but I think and I'd love to hear from you and from your listeners. I think definitely we have evidence that the teachers are giving specific parts of our content to classes, maybe when they're differentiating, maybe when they're doing revision sessions, so that they can, work through it in school.
Welcome to TandTeaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. I'm Arthur Moore, and with me, as always, it's Mike Harrowell. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Arthur. How are you?
I'm really good, buddy. How are you? And Albie's going to make a tiny appearance in this pod, I think. So how are you and Albie?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. For anyone listening, Albie's not our imaginary friend. It's my two-month-old child who had to come and join us on the podcast for a little bit. But you can't hear him, so it's as if he's not here. I'm good, Arthur. It's exam season. It's busy, stressful. So let's talk to someone who can help us all cope with exam season.
Well, Mike, you're lucky, because we are talking to the executive producer of BBC Bitesize, with all the secondary focused. We are going to be talking about BBC Bitesize, how it works, all the new stuff they've got coming out, how we can use it in our classrooms. We're going to be talking about the new podcast series that they have, which is absolutely awesome for students. So we're going to be talking to Oonagh Jaquest, who is the executive producer of BBC Bitesize. So go away, get a cup of tea, get a biscuit, and we are going to be talking about Bitesize. Welcome back to TandTeaching. We are joined by Oonagh from BBC Bitesize. Oonagh, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's our absolute pleasure. Do you want to give us a quick introduction into kind of who you are and kind of BBC Bitesize in general, and then we'll kind of go from there?
Yes, so my name's Oonagh Jaquest. I'm the executive producer of Bitesize Secondary, which sounds a bit grand, doesn't it? But what I do and my team does is we make all the lovely content supporting GCSE and Key Stage 3 throughout England. So we have the privilege of getting to make lots of lovely content across all the different GCSE subjects, video, written content, interactive content, games, quizzes, now podcasts, you name it. And it's our busy season, isn't it? Because we are coming into the season, the exam season.
Exactly. BBC Bitesize is one of those things I think we all in, especially UK education, we know it's something we've all used as teachers. I know it was something I used when I was kind of sitting my GCSEs. a while ago now, but
Mhm.
it's something that's kind of ingrained in kind of our especially our UK education system. So like we're going to talk a little bit about different aspects of BBC Bitesize and kind of what's new and stuff like that. But I was just kind of wondering, like, when you kind of want to describe what BBC Bitesize is, kind of what's your kind of, how do you explain what this huge thing is in kind of to everyone?
So I often say, because it's true, that we are the UK's leading free education resource, and we kind of have this promise to young people and children who use us, which is we've got you. So if you have a need, if there's something that you're trying to learn in your curriculum learning, then we've probably got something for you. That's a very, very simple way of describing it. As you say, it is a really, really big service. So the team that I run runs everything for secondary, so Key Stage 3 and GCSE, but we've got a primary team. So we've got content going all the way from reception now, which is brilliant. And I always find it really fun because, you know, we've got teams that are making content for people who are learning their, you know, first phonics. And then we've got my team who are making content about quadratic equations and about, you know, some of the more complex aspects of GCSE history. We've got content across all the nations of the UK. That's really important to say. So if you're doing your National 4 and 5s in Scotland, or if you're doing your GCSEs in Wales or in Northern Ireland, we've got content for you. And some of the bits that are less known, I think, are also gems. So we have a whole careers area of Bitesize, and that's an area that I don't own it, but I really love it because we have a lot of beautiful video content that really relates what you're learning in your subjects now at kind of ages 14 to 16 to jobs that you might go on to do, so that you can sort of see that onward path. And then very relevant to what we're doing now at this time of year, we've got loads of support content. So some of that's around mental health, supporting you as a person, which is really, really important. Some of that's for parents and, you know, how to, you know, parenting and how to support children in all aspects of their education. And some of it's really exam specific. So it's, you know, debunking some of the sort of myths about how you learn and giving you some really sort of practical ways of doing that. So things like, you know, spaced repetition in quizzing, but in, you know, layperson's language for sort of for your 16-year-olds who've got to be doing that exam.
Yeah, what I've always really liked about BBC Bitesize is, as you said, that breadth that it covers, but it is also, it's not just breadth and very shallow, it's that real depth of knowledge that kind of helps students across the board. And we're recording this kind of as we're entering kind of that exam season. We had a little chat pre-pod about how we're kind of in that world of exams at the moment. I'm just wondering how, from kind of your perspective, how that change, do you feel that within BBC Bitesize that kind of change as we enter exam, or is it just kind of business as usual? Is it a different vibe in the office, I suppose?
Well, as I was saying to you earlier, we make content all year round, and, you know, our really sort of big point that we've got to hit is getting that new content live in time for exam season, so that it's all there. Because I know, and as I've been saying to you, I've got a teenager at home who's sitting her GCSEs this year, so I know that, you know, by the time the Easter holidays hit, that's really squeaky bum time, isn't it? That's the point when you know, kids and teachers are starting to, you know, really get their heads down and revise. The big changes that I see actually, and not so much at the time of year, but sort of thinking over the last few years, I think there's been a huge development in the ed tech world. So Bitesize was there. I know it's not what we're talking about today, but Bitesize was there during the pandemic, which was a huge moment, you know, for my team. It was the sort of thing that I'd never imagined that I would be asked to do, providing those lessons for students up and down the country. And, you know, my team was sort of sitting at home on, you know, kitchen chairs, much as we are now, trying to pull that together with the help of all our sort of partners in the education world. But if I think back now to how learning and revision has changed, we've all seen massive changes, haven't we? And Bitesize has changed over that time too. So, you know, since that point in 2020, We've upgraded a lot of our content. Our content is a lot more interactive now. If you look at our Key Stage 3 content, it's full of quizzes, it's full of games, a lot more sort of tools to help you as a learner in that way that are more interactive. And we've started to move that into GCSE as well. We've also launched podcasts in the last year, which are amazing. But I just think students now have so much more at their fingertips in terms of technology and learning, and have much higher expectations of what it can do. And that's been really quite rapid in the last few years, that change. And, you know, I hope that we're sort of staying at the forefront of it.
No, it's something I've definitely noticed kind of about BBC Dart. So you can see it updating and kind of, as you said, like being as good as it absolutely can be. And like, I'm sure if you went back 10 years and looked at BBC Bitesize, it would be a crazy difference, like a lot of things. Mike, you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously you're updating content based on syllabus changes and things like that. But how do you know in terms of the way you're presenting information that it's relevant and accessible to students and that they're finding it really, really useful? Is there a feedback process, or is it more kind of a moderation process that you go through as a team?
Yeah, absolutely, there is. So we do user testing in a nutshell. So any work that we do, there's a whole sort of cycle to how we make our content, but sort of end to end, we would start out making a new program of study or an updated feature of a program of study or a new type of content, like our new podcasts, for example. We'd have loads of focus groups with teachers. We'd also be going into classrooms and seeing what the particular issues are in that subject. You know, a little example might be, you know, quite granular things like when we were making new design and technology GCSE, it's understanding how important maths was and how much actually that was a struggle for those students, and that was going to be the area that they fell down on in the exams. So that's where we needed to put some, you know, extra effort in. So we do all that, we go through the process of making the content, and then really iteratively, as we're making the content, we're going out to schools and visiting schools and seeing how it's used and refining it and refining it. I think just before the pandemic, one of my teams who are making new modern foreign languages content for Key Stage 3 in French, Spanish and German went on a tour of schools pretty much across the north of England, as it happens, and saw about 600 students. But now, of course, we get to do a lot of that on Zoom or Teams, or, you know, other video systems exist, and we'll go into classrooms more remotely, and, you know, have sort of networks of teachers who will test stuff with their classes and feed back to us. So yeah, we get lots of feedback in almost real time, if you like, and we use that to refine what we do.
I think that's one thing about BBC Bitesize, is like the sheer amount of knowledge behind the scenes in terms of just reaching out to teachers and educators and students as well, is, as you said, kind of been the leading UK free educational resource. But also all that stuff behind it is kind of like ridiculous when you really think about what BBC Bitesize can provide. You spoke about kind of lots of new content and resources that's kind of going up all the time. Is there anything you've noticed recently, like this is the big thing, this is the one that's the most popular, this is one that's been used, or anything you're super proud of that's kind of come out recently?
I've got loads of new content that I'm super proud of. I think in terms of things that are popular, we have some perennials. So science is always really, you know, it's always a really, really big hitter, but then, you know, humanities are as well. Maths and English, because everybody's got to get through them. I think sometimes you'll know yourselves, some of the really knowledge heavy subjects, knowledge rich, but also knowledge heavy subjects get a lot of use, and we see different patterns of usage. So, you know, we'll see with some of those subjects like biology, where there's just a huge amount of material to get through, that will really get hit just before the exams. But I think some of the stuff that I'm really proud of that's new, you know, that cuts across subjects, and you'll know this, like it might be that biology is a really big hitter, but if it's your geography exam you've got tomorrow, and that's the thing you need to pass, and that's the thing that's most important to you now as a student, isn't it? Is, you know, all of the subjects are important. The new stuff that we've got, so quizzes, that's really big. So we've got, we launched for last year, and we've got more of it this year. Bitesize is known for having quizzes, but we've really sort of improved the technology that we have behind that. They're much more interactive. They've got different sort of media types in them. And we've now got exam style questions across a number of subjects and quick fire quizzes, so that you can go in for that sort of last minute exam practice, rather than just based on the particular topic that you're studying. And we've just rolled out lots of that across the site. So there's just more and more quizzing to test yourself on how you're doing, because we know that's just so important to teachers and to students. Podcasts I'm really, really proud of as well. So I don't know whether you've had chance to hear the podcasts, but this time last year we launched a set of new podcasts which we made in partnership with BBC Sounds. So I don't know if you've heard of BBC Sounds. It's the BBC, the BBC's audio app. Amazing, radio and podcast makers. So we realised that students, that young people increasingly are listening to podcasts, and that audio was a mode of learning that we didn't really have. So we have loads of video that we're really known for, games for learning through play, but we didn't have podcasts. And so we launched last year with English literature and biology. And this year we've followed up. We've now got more English literature, we've got chemistry, and we've got physics. And they've done really, really well. So basically the concept of them is they sit on BBC Bitesize, as you might expect, embedded in the subjects where you might find them. And if you're sitting at your desk in your bedroom revising biology, you can listen to that podcast. You can go to the material on Bitesize alongside it and listen and make notes and rewind. But they're also sitting on BBC Sounds. So that's really valuable, because you can just subscribe to the whole series. You can have them on your mobile phone and your headphones and go and be sort of listening to them on the bus.
There's a great series on there for study skills, isn't there? The BBC Bitesize for study skills, where there's like these little 5-minute episodes. There's one about like why you might be using flashcards wrong. And me and Mike, we've spoken about flashcards and we're big fans and how important they are. And there's a lovely little 5-minute podcast that you can recommend to your students about how to use flashcards properly. And that's just a really great way for them to think about their revision, as you're listening to this, we're probably in full-on revision season. And Mike, I think we're noticing students are kind of coming about their revision in different ways now. They're being they've got more choice, but they also understand a bit more about how to revise.
Yeah, it was going to be my next question, actually, was I think some students really struggle with, where do I start? That first ever revision session they do can be really, really overwhelming, because it's like, I've got all these subjects, all this content I've got to revise. Where do I start? So I'm interested in terms of how would you recommend that students use Bitesize, but also as teachers, we support our children using Bitesize?
Oh, now that's a tough and an interesting question, because we always say, and it is true, that we know that the most important recommenders of content for students are teachers. So, the teacher is the person who is going to know best what area you're struggling in, what you need to practice more, what you need to go over again. So we know that the teachers do recommend our material. I think teachers, sorry, what was the question? What would I say that teachers should recommend, or what do I think that they do recommend?
I guess, how can we work with our students to support them using a resource like Bitesize? I know, I'll give an example for Arthur. You wouldn't just say, right, we're 3 months away from our exams now, you need to start revising maths. I know, for instance, Arthur would very much have a list of areas of each student, say, these are the areas you need to go and kind of focus your revision on. Is there strategies like that, or is it kind of, do you find it's better if a student kind of takes ownership over that platform themselves?
I think I think they do both, to be honest. I think they do both. So you've called out our study support resources, and those study support resources are really good at helping you to plan as a student sort of how to use our resources. But in terms of what teachers use and recommend, they do it in lots of different ways. So one of the things, so for example, around podcasts that teachers told us even before we made the podcasts, was that they were going to be really valuable because for a lot of students, reading load is an issue. So for subjects like English Lit, there'll be students who haven't read the text, who are struggling to read the text, who are struggling to retain it. So they said, yeah, great, please do make podcasts, because for those students, we would get them to listen to it first before we then teach a session on that, or before we then do a revision session on it or quiz them on it, because it will help them to recap. It will help that information to go in, and it will do it in a way, I don't want to say sort of buzzwords like cognitive load, but it will do it in a way that for my students who are less confident readers particularly, or for those who have other reasons that they're finding it difficult to read, or just because they haven't read the text for 2 years because they did it at the beginning of year 10 and it's now the end of year 11, that's going to be really useful for them to go through. So that's one of the ways. And interestingly enough, we found when we did make podcasts across English Lit and Sciences, that actually science teachers really valued it for the same sort of reason, that you can go over the material, it's a quick blast, and then I can do it with you. But also, the quizzes are really valuable. Teachers can and do send young people to go and do a set of quizzes. The videos get used in all sorts of ways by teachers. You'll know how creative teachers can be with videos. So we have BBC Teach, which is specifically designed for teachers, but they use bite-sized videos as well. So they might go and say, watch this video to recap, or they might set it as a, they're using Google Classroom now and all sorts of other, and Teams and all sorts of other ways of setting work. So, just giving links to go through the material.
Mike, what are you finding this year kind of with revisions? They're like, because every year we kind of try something new as teachers, like what's your kind of go-to thing you're recommending for your students this year?
I think it just goes back to what I was saying there, is in terms of students don't know what they don't know. So a lot of time with revision, students will go and revise what they know first because it makes them feel really good about themselves, and they walk away thinking, oh, I know all this stuff, my revision's working. But they don't know what the topics necessarily they're weaker on, or they want to avoid them, because why would you want to spend 30, 40 minutes looking through stuff that you don't understand? It makes you feel really bad about yourselves. So for me, it's about guiding students on what they should revise based on our knowledge of them. So looking at the 2 years and saying, over the 2 years, I know that this topic, and that little bit there, that's where you've struggled on exams or on assessments and things. Here's the link, or here's the website, here's what I want you to do before next lesson, and then linking it in with my lessons. So revision shouldn't be something you do just at home and it never kind of comes into the lessons. It should be, right, this little group here, I want you to revise this topic ready for next lesson. And then I'm going to work with you guys as a smaller group next lesson, just focusing on that topic, and then a different group of a different topic, which can be really, really difficult as a teacher to do, but it can help the students either understand what they don't know, or I guess kind of tackle something they're not confident with without worrying about it's going to ruin their confidence.
Yeah, and we do know, because obviously when you run websites and digital services, you have data. We do know that that our website is used during the school day. So at primary, we absolutely know and expect that teachers are using our stuff on whiteboards. Less so at secondary, but I think and I'd love to hear from you and from your listeners. I think definitely we have evidence that teachers are giving specific parts of our content to classes, maybe when they're differentiating, maybe when they're doing revision sessions, so that they can work through it in school. And And if I can touch on some of our key stage 3 content, actually, because, you know, GCSEs aren't all achieved in that last 2 years, although it can feel like it. I know it can. In
Last
fact,
2 days quite often, I find.
yeah, well, I have a 15-year-old in my house. It feels like the last 2 months. But if I can touch on the key stage 3 content, some of that, if you look at the games that we've made particularly, so we've got a game called History Detectives, which is all about history, funnily enough. And if I can give it a plug, it won the Tiger Award last year for the best learning game. It's a Games Industry Award. But that's structured. It's an investigation game, so you go and learn history skills by investigating what were conditions like for children in the Victorian era, or, you know, were the black people in Tudor England and what was their role. And, you know, you go around, you find sources, you collect clues, you figure that out for yourself, and baked into that are inquiry skills, are skills about using sources as well as the knowledge. And that's the kind, you know, that learning through play is the kind of thing that teachers can set for children to do, for young people to do at home, but they can also do it with classes. And in fact, you know, the basis of that game, the idea for that game and the reason I commissioned it was because that's exactly what history teachers do in some instances. They do that sort of inquiry-based learning. So yeah, you can use our resources in that way, absolutely, as, you know, creatively as you like.
Well, I often find, and I know you know it's a lot, Mike, teachers are amazing at using resources, and they are amazing at finding resources, and they go off and find these little things, they bring them back and share them. And I think that's one of the really nice things about, like, there's loads of websites to do, but BBC Bitesize is one of them, where you can kind of take these things that work for your students, and then you can give them a hint to go a little bit further. So if something's working in your classroom, you can say, well, it was on BBC Bitesize, just like I remember my teacher saying to that, like, just go on BBC Bitesize, and it's really easy to find. And I think there is also, I don't know if you find this, Matt, but like, there's so much content out there at the moment in terms of revision that sometimes it's overwhelmed to be like, how do I know this is good revision? Like, am I actually going to spend like time going through this? Whereas I think there is a certain kind with because it's the BBC, and, you know, it's kind of got that backing, it's got that research that we've spoke about would be behind it, that it's already gone through a load of teachers, that you can recommend it in a quite confident way, where maybe you wouldn't do when you're just recommending someone's TikTok video that you haven't seen yet. Probably wouldn't recommend that yet, Mike. I don't know what you do, but just recommending TikTok videos everywhere.
Yeah, not big on TikTok. One thing that works really well for me, I know this is moving back into Key Stage 4, but is the fact that the content is exam board specific. So I know if I say to my students, we are doing this exam board, you know, go on Bitesize, and you can access that information, you know, like you said, Arthur, because it's coming from that credible source, that it's been cross-referenced with the specification, it's updated as specifications are changed, and it's a really reliable kind of source of information for them as well.
Yeah.
So important, Mike, getting the right exam. It's so easy for students to go and revise and then come out and like, I haven't learned this. It's not on your exam board. Why are you revising it? So no, really lovely point.
It's the being exam board specific is really important to us. So as you probably know, all of our guides are exam board specific, and when we set out to make podcasts, they're all labeled with, you know, which exam board and which paper in some instances. So we structured, you know, our science papers, this is getting really detailed now, but our science series is so that you start in episode 1 with the stuff that you will need to do if you're doing combined science and, you know, foundation papers, and by episode 10, if there's 10 episodes in the series, or 9 or whatever it is, it will tell you if you don't need to know that unless you're doing single science, because that material, you know, that higher material will only be relevant there. But yeah, it's really important to us that our content's trustworthy. And just to sort of plug for a minute, in case anybody doesn't know, but all of our content is written by subject matter experts, which is, you know, teachers, you know, teaching experienced resource makers, and, you know, double checked by teachers. So it's all trustworthy, and it's all structured as well, which is really important to me. So if you go through one of our guides, you might read an introduction, you might watch a video, then there'll be a little, you know, a little thing just sort of checking you, asking you a little question about that. So it's all, there's a structure to it. And similarly with our podcasts, it might be like a 10-minute episode or a 9-minute episode, really short, but there'll be a structure to it. It'll tell you what you're going to learn. It'll, you know, pick you up on a tricky bit and say, here's a good way of remembering this. It'll give you a bit of, you know, if you don't understand this term I've just used, that's in episode 3, go back to that. You might want to pause here and write this down. So it's giving you all the structure to sort of scaffold and hopefully build your skills as a learner as well.
We've spoke about like you're making new content all the time. What's kind of, is there in a year's time, 5 years time, where do you see BBC Bitesize kind of going forward? Like, as you said, it's not just about this exam year. So like going forward, what's kind of the big idea for BBC Bitesize?
Oh, well, we do have big plans for BBC Bitesize. You know, it's one of the BBC's major products that it invests in. So, you know, alongside BBC iPlayer, BBC Sounds, BBC Sport, BBC News, you know, that kind of level. We see it going into a place where it's more personalized and more adaptive. So it's doing that job of walking you as an individual through your learning more. So, you know, I see it as, you know, you'll be able to log in, you'll be able to save your progress, you'll be able to get more personalized feedback on your learning. I'd like to get through an interview without saying the words AI because it feels like a buzzword at the moment, but actually we're thinking about really judicious and intelligent ways of using AI. So, you know, how you might use it to you know, do better marking of exam style questions, for example, or to identify the areas that are being struggled with so you can give study suggestions. So those kinds of areas. So yes, we're just trying to make it more personalized and, you know, ever more interactive, but without compromising on any of that quality that you know, students and teachers expect from us.
And I think that's kind of like the whole BBC part of Bitesize is really important. Like this whole inform, educate, and entertain. Like that's all part of kind of the philosophy of the whole organization. And I don't try and hide my BBC love, so I won't like hide.
Good.
Like I'm very biased because I love the BBC. Was brought up on 5 Live. That was my education. I think just put on 5 Live. It's been really interesting, kind of talking about BBC Bitesize. Like it's a product I think a lot of almost all teachers who are listening to this will be like, I've used that at some point, and I would definitely kind of recommend kind of going back and having another look. Is there a specific kind of resource that you're like really proud of? Like, if you could recommend one resource, taking out age and kind of subject, is there the one where you like you look at that every day and like, yeah, like that's good. I'm really happy with that.
I can't just pick one. Can I tell you what's new for this exam season? Because
Yeah,
I can't not tell you what's new for this exam season. So we've got a load of new GCSE English literature, so new set texts, which will obviously be important to English teachers. That's been really interesting because the exam boards, as you might know, if you're engaged in English, have been really sort of diversifying their set texts. But one of the things that we hear from teachers is that, you know, if they don't have the resources to teach them, then they can't. So we've got lots of stuff like Mallory Blackman, Boys Don't Cry, My Name is Leon by Kit Duvall, Refugee Boy, Benjamin Zephaniah, massive poetry collection that we've added to, which I know in English Lit students really struggle with and are quite scared of poetry. So, you know, that's amazing new content. GCSE RS, we've religious studies, I should say, we've just gone live with the first phase of supporting thematic studies. That's been a bit of a labour of love because that's all quite complex subject matter. If you know religious studies, the thematic paper is the paper where you have to analyse some really big, meaty issues through the lens of what major faiths say about that. So war, family, relationships, you know, all the sort of the big, meaty stuff. And we've just gone live with family and relationships. And there's some really beautiful video content in that, which really walks you through like how you might think about answering some of those really tough questions. And we've just started launching some new GCSE French and Spanish content because the specifications have been completely revised. That's been, if you're into foreign languages, which I certainly am, that's been a long time coming, that the whole, systems being overhauled and specifications being overhauled. So we've got lots of new content for that. And lots of new geography video content as well. Everything from, the big global stuff like climate change to how to do coastal field work and river field work. And, I really love that kind of content because I'm always mindful that not all children and young people across the country have the same access and opportunities to go places as others. So, you might not have got to do that coastal field work, but you can see that video. Yeah. But if there were one thing I would have to say, if I could say, listen to one thing, the podcast series, or all of them that we launched last year, I think are so brilliant because they've got that content is accurate and it really helps you, with all the structure and how to remember it. But the presenters, who I haven't even touched on yet, are just great. And the first thing I thought when we finished the first ones is that these feel like a friend, and you really need that when you're studying. So whether it's we've got Dr. Alex Lathbridge on biology, who's a great science communicator, or whether you're on English, where you've got Carl Anker, who you might know, who's a sports broadcaster, and Holly McNish, who's a poet, Testament, who's also a brilliant sort of poet and performer, Jean Mingis, and the whole new crop of podcast presenters that we've got this year. They're so passionate, they're so warm, and it feels like they're with you every step of the way. And if I could say, listen to one series, listen to GCSE poetry. That's a really beautiful series, and it's got some of the poets who are whose work, the living poets whose work is on the syllabus, like Simon Armitage, like Imtiaz Darka, are actually in it talking about their poems. So
just going to say, I wish the one thing from all we've said today, I wish I'd had when I was at school, was a podcast series about my poetry exams, because I found it difficult. Let's just say I just found it difficult reading it, let alone having someone read it to me and then analyze it would have been amazing. And me and Mike spend far too much of our time on BBC Sounds as it is, Mike, so we can just add some of that stuff to. I don't think a day goes by, Mike, where we don't message each other about an episode on BBC Sounds.
The life we live.
The life we live. We have messaged this week about BBC podcasts on BBC Sounds, so it's awesome. Oonagh, thank you so much for your time to come on TandTeaching.
You're welcome.
Yeah, just absolutely awesome. I would say, where do people go to find out more about BBC Bitesize? But I think we all know, but I will ask it anyway, Oonagh. Where do people go to find out more about BBC Bitesize?
You can go to BBC Bitesize. You can download the BBC Bitesize app from your app store or play store of choice. Or you can now go to BBC Sounds and search for Bitesize if podcasts are your thing.
They are most certainly our thing. So absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Oonagh. Massively appreciate it. Listeners, we'll be back in a moment.
Well, welcome back to TandTeaching. Thank you for listening to that wonderful podcast with Oonagh from BBC Bitesize. Arthur, what was your key takeaway?
I do love BBC Bitesize. It's such a good resource to have.
Great takeaway. Thank you very much for sharing.
I really like the point.
There's more. There's more.
There is more. There is more. I really like the point. I think you and Oonagh kind of made together is just so about, because it's exam board specific. That's so useful for our students because it directs them towards that thing. As Oonagh was saying, kind of with the science, like, right, you're doing single science, stop here, kind of double science, like go here, or the Scottish board. Like, it's really great with all that stuff. And we know how important that is for our students. And with the amount of content out there, it's really easy. I know the students I work with all the time come back to me and say, like, oh, I was revising this. And I'm like, that's literally not on your paper. Like, where have you got that from? So I think BBC Bitesize is great for that. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, just to follow up that point, I think it's not just that. Sometimes they've got similar content, but it's categorized in different ways. Like I know Edexcel GCSE PE have a slightly different way of categorizing the information than OCR, and that can be a stumbling block. So yeah, I agree with you on that. For me, that little podcast series they're doing, well, it's not little. It sounds like they've really smashed the podcast. Just students being able to just pop their headphones in and listen on the way to school, and get the advice on this certain aspect, that aspect, this paper, or even just the study skills podcasts is a really good place for students to start with where to structure their revision and how to go about it. So I think that's a really, really key resource that we should be pushing our children towards.
Yeah, completely agree. It just gives them another way to kind of access that information. And then kind of we as teachers and educators, we know because it's kind of got that BBC background in it, like it's going to be good content because of the amount of layers it has to go through to become a podcast. It's not just two guys, like one in their kitchen, one in the attic, logging on saying we're going to make a podcast. Like this has actually gone through some layers to be a really good product. I could have been talking about anything there, Mike. I wasn't
Very specific example.
Anyway, yeah, so go out and check BBC Bitesize. You know where to find it. It's easy.
Thank you very much for listening to TandTeaching.
Thank you for listening to this episode of TandTeaching.
If you've enjoyed the content of this episode, please feel free to share it with other educators.
And if you're able to, please leave a review on the platform.
And as always, thank you for listening to TandTeaching.